Welcome to Nedex International. The oil depot in the Stavropol Krai region was rendered ineffective by unmanned aerial vehicles, exposing the ineffectiveness of air defense systems. For reliable news, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. Let's move on to the details. A massive operation was launched by Ukraine's drone operators. In an aerial operation conducted by the Ukrainian Air Force, a Russian oil depot was set ablaze. The air defense systems praised by Russian President Vladimir Putin failed to stop Ukraine's drones. A large explosion occurred at the Russian oil depot, which became the target of Ukrainian UAVs. What kind of statement will Vladimir Putin, who has been embarrassed before the entire world, make? The inadequacy of Russia's air defense systems has reached the breaking point for Russian citizens. Ukraine's air operations have been in the news a lot lately. Throughout the war, both sides have carried out airstrikes against each other. However, due to Ukraine's new strategy, these operations against Russia have become very important for Ukraine. Throughout the war, the Ukrainian military has carried out airstrikes targeting Russian headquarters, positions, air defense systems, and tanks inside Ukrainian territory. Until now, the airstrikes were directed against all types of weapons in the Russian military inventory. However, after a while, the Ukrainian armed forces authorities realized that they had to adopt a different strategy. It is well known that the Russian military has never hesitated to attack Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Russia has continued these attacks despite heavy criticism from countries around the world for committing war crimes on Ukrainian territory in order to win this war. In response, the Ukrainian government has dramatically escalated its strategy, taking a much tougher stance. The Ukrainian military has shifted its focus from directly targeting Russian weapons to targeting Russian military resources. The fact that these operations took place inside Russian territory attracted global media attention because Ukrainian forces successfully destroyed targets despite being protected by Russian air defense systems. Ukraine has carried out significant operations, destroying not only oil and gas facilities, but also alcohol production facilities, reportedly used by the Russian military for weapons production. Most recently, the Ukrainian army successfully targeted a Russian oil depot in Stavropol Krai. Here are the details of the news. According to reports from Defense Express and many other news agencies, Ukrainian forces blew up a Russian oil depot in the Stavropol Krai region. The Kremlin's air defense systems, which it described as extremely dangerous, failed to prevent this attack. Video footage of the drone strike was shared on Telegram and other social media platforms, clearly showing a Ukrainian UAV crashing into a Russian oil depot, causing a massive explosion and a fiery blaze. Pro-Ukrainian resistance fighters made a statement on Telegram, announcing that the Ukrainian defense forces successfully hit a significant Russian oil depot in the town of Svetlograd, Stavropol Krai. The statement from the resistance stated, "Last night, Ukrainian defense forces drones successfully hit an oil depot important for Russian occupiers in the city of Svetlograd in the Stavropol region." The resistance also expressed that it was not a secret that they were actively sharing information with Ukrainian forces, hoping that their data would assist the Ukrainian defense forces in hitting this facility. It was later revealed that the resistance had previously shared information about this site, emphasizing that the oil depot needed to be targeted. The statement indicated that this oil depot likely served the fuel needs of Russian units stationed on the southeastern front. They also mentioned that there are many more targets similar to this one that are waiting in line to be hit. Interestingly, Russian citizens living in the area have reached a breaking point in their frustration. Recently, explosions and fires within Russian territory have caused significant anxiety among Russian citizens who have begun to understand what their Ukrainian counterparts are experiencing and have been vocalizing their complaints. Concerned about the spillover of the war to Russian territory and Vladimir Putin's inability to ensure Russia's border security, Russian citizens have begun to voice their grievances. Sources say that Russian citizens living near the border are leaving their homes for larger cities such as Moscow, where they believe they are safer. These citizens, who believe that their security in the border region is at risk, blame Vladimir Putin for their situation. No casualties were reported after the Ukrainian army's operation targeting the oil depot in Svetlograd. On the other hand, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's statements remain on the agenda. As the intensity of the war escalated once again, both sides increased their attacks against each other. Ukrainian leader Zelensky reported that Russia attacked Ukraine with more than 900 bombs, around 500 Shahed drones, and 30 missiles last week alone. The worst part is that the vast majority of these attacks were against civilian facilities and critical infrastructure in Ukraine. Attacks on civilian settlements were reported with evidence of destruction by Ukrainian military air defense systems. Zelensky called on his allies to provide Ukraine with sufficient long-range offensive weapons in a statement via his Telegram channel. He also emphasized the need for effective sanctions to block Russian imports of critical components used in drone and missile production. Zelensky said that such attacks would become impossible if political decisions were taken that could remove Russia's will to fight. Ukraine deserves the same reliable security as all our partners in the free world. According to a statement made by the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces on November 3rd, the number of Russian soldiers killed within Ukraine since the beginning of the war has risen to 699,090. The Kyiv Independent noted that this figure includes 1,410 losses from the Russian army over the last 2 days. Additionally, the report indicated that Russia has lost 9,182 tanks, 18,053 armored combat vehicles, 28,160 vehicles and fuel tanks, 20,086 artillery systems, 1,244 multiple launch rocket systems, 994 air defense systems, 369 aircraft, 329 helicopters, 1,187 drones, 28 ships and boats, and 1 submarine. Another report by the Kyiv Independent indicated that Australia has provided Ukraine with extended-range JDAM-ER glide bomb kits for direct attack munitions. The Kyiv Independent cited a report from the Australian Defence magazine dated November 1st, explaining that JDAMs are kits that convert simple freefall bombs into guided munitions and help adjust the bomb's trajectory as it approaches the target, thus increasing accuracy thanks to GPS. According to Bloomberg, once the bomb hits the ground, its wings deploy, allowing it to glide for up to 72 kilometers, effectively tripling the range of the original weapon. The report stated that Australia announced military aid of $168 million to Ukraine in July alone, marking the largest aid package Australia has provided since the beginning of the war. Additionally, a report from ABC News in Australia mentioned that 49 US-made Abrams tanks, which are about to be retired, would be donated to Ukraine. The Kyiv Independent explicitly stated that it could not independently verify these reports. As the war between Russia and Ukraine continues, support from allies has increased. Everyone is wondering when this war will end, but recent developments suggest that the conflict will continue for a long time to come. The deployment of troops from North Korea to Russia and the Kremlin's efforts to recruit more troops indicate that the war will continue next year. In addition, Ukraine's active operations on Russian territory are a clear sign that this conflict will intensify. What do you think needs to be done to end this war? A critical error has come from the Russian army. Putin, who is trying to forcibly recruit troops from the areas he has occupied in Ukraine, has completely cornered this time. And the numerous advantages gained at this point have been completely lost this time. After the anti-Putin politics began to strengthen, a period of great loss for Russia has begun in this latest incident, which is based on the occupation process. In the last days of the Ukrainian war, the Ukrainian army began to squeeze the Russian army from many fronts. This paved the way for the process to move towards a volatile point in regional terms. The fact that anti-Putin politics created a different area of dominance had exactly this to do with it. The fact that Putin's basic policies do not reflect many people in Russia, and that a largely problematic foreign policy is pursued between the countries, would also lead things towards greater confusion. At this point, the developments related to the Russian army have led to the emergence of a crisis in every field. The fact that Russia is facing major problems against Ukraine, first in Kursk and then in Donbass, has greatly damaged trust in Putin in the regional sense. However, it was also related to the fact that the Russian army suffered very serious losses. The fact that all kinds of problems in Russia have come to the fore so much, and this process has not been managed correctly, has also created the basis for a great deal of confusion. Putin, who also faced the situation of not being able to find soldiers to fight against Ukraine, has started to take many steps related to this incident. But it would also unintentionally trigger a major crisis. It was understood by recent intelligence data and captive Russian soldiers that the Russian occupiers were disturbed by many policies during the war and made very similar statements. In addition, the fact that an anti-Putin movement was put forward by many figures in the army also began to drag things towards a rather complicated point. It has also been said that Putin completely destroys the possible advantages that he can achieve, and as a result of this, inflames the problems in Russia. The demonstration of Putin's wrong policies as the main reason why Russia is no longer a fully respected or feared country in the region has been seen as the main trigger for a bigger crisis in all areas. At this point, in addition to the growth of anti-Putin politics, Putin, who wanted to forcibly attract soldiers into the army, was faced with a development that he never expected. Despite continuing his aggressive policies against Ukraine, Putin could not get the advantages he wanted. While this greatly damaged Russia's attacks in Donbass, it also paved the way for the anti-Putin policy to be fully implemented. In addition, Putin's request to constantly recruit soldiers to the army was also revealed by Ukrainian intelligence. According to the National Resistance Center, the departments tasked with recruiting Russians have become active again. The source of the information received about this incident was the moves of the Russian army, which was concentrating its mobilization efforts on the occupied points. It was stated that the filtering procedures at the raids and checkpoints in public spaces are carried out on a daily basis, so that a screening is carried out. In this incident, which actively manifested itself in the Primorsky district of Mariupol, which was temporarily occupied, it is known that the enemy focused especially on young men. A large number of questions are asked to these young men, in which the advantages that will be obtained if the occupation is accepted by the people of the region, and private military service are discussed. If these young people do not leave the region, they are forced to take classes on patriotism and the necessity of serving in the Russian army. In the details of the report, he said, "It's not just about propaganda slogans. The Russian occupation administration created conditions under which men could obtain Russian passports only through fake military service bureaus. There is also a part in the form of." CNS also announced the publication of a recent study on the life expectancy of Russian soldiers. According to this published report, it was reported that contract soldiers do not live more than 8 months. The National Resistance Center issued warnings to people living in occupied areas not to join the Russian army. While it is known that Russia has made such breakthroughs in other occupied areas, according to the report that appeared in Stavropol, Luhansk, it is stated that propaganda has been intensified. Promising financial rewards to high school students, Russia encourages Ukrainian youth to join the Russian armed forces. This actually shows that the war will progress further, and the policies to be followed against the Russian army will manifest itself proportionally to this. In other words, Russia is entering into such a political process both at the points it occupies, while at the same time it is looking for Ukrainian supporters for the policies it is pursuing against Ukraine. These steps of Putin, who is thought to be aiming to create a Ukrainian state inside the Russian Federation in the near future, are seen as the basis for raising a generation connected to Russia. In other words, the process that started with the assimilation policy is expressed as the beginning of a new era in which much bigger problems will arise. The data revealed about this incident clearly shows why the Russian army needs so many soldiers. As of October 24th, the losses of the Russian army in one day are over 1240. The fact that it lost all 45 artillery systems in just a single day shows how heavy the cost of the scattered and strategically inadequate attacks of the Russian army is. If this continues in this way, the possibility of facing defeat against Ukraine in a much shorter period of time is also coming to the fore more than ever. At this point, it is possible that the continuation of the foundations based on such attacks on Ukraine will also lead to a period of major collapse. At this point, the fact that Ukraine is more prone to new technologies and is able to detonate tanks, which have been considered the great guarantee of the Russian army so far, and a large number of vehicles, which are a necessity of the army, can also be seen as completely related to this. It is possible to say how important the strategic operations of the Ukrainian army, which exploded a T-72 tank belonging to the Russian army with unmanned aerial vehicles in the last operation, are. The Ukrainian army has always cited this as the main reason why it moved to the forefront against Russia during the war. In response to the shallow view of the Russian military towards technological developments, Ukraine has always actively used modern technologies of the era. Unmanned aerial vehicles, the most important of these, were again at the forefront. The UAVs used by the soldiers of the Phoenix unit of the Revenge Brigade destroyed 3 Russian vehicles and 2 BMP-2 in a similar way. At this point, while the 5 invaders were neutralized, the victory against the Russian army shifted to a completely different point. The report written by the border guards about this incident in the Kupiansk region said, "The border guards destroyed a T-72 tank in the Kupiansk part and damaged one of them." Although this is one of the hundreds of operations that show the importance of unmanned aerial vehicles, it has actually made many question marks about the process disappear completely. The failures that Putin has experienced in his attacks are based on a quality that may bring new failures to be experienced in a regional sense. This shares with the whole world that any kind of movement that can be called anti-Putin is actually actively showing itself in Russia and other territories as well. Just as it is not yet clear what Putin will do at this point, it is not yet known how much Russia will increase the views opposed to Putin. Despite entering a period of opposition to Ukraine, his inability to handle what is wanted in any way is seen as another basic element that damages Putin's area of regional dominance. The fact that the Russian people, anticipating that the Russian army will now face even greater difficulties if it continues in this way, have focused on an opposing reaction to the war has also caused the possibilities to become clearer. This shows how desperate Putin will be at the prospect of facing such an important danger as early elections, while the formation of an anti-Putin policy has caused it to be seen that the current regional policies in Russia will now develop based on some larger problems. It is also seen as the basis for Ukraine to have a significant superiority to a large extent. And with the effect of this, it is thought that it is among the possibilities that Putin will take things to a different point and have a structure based on aggressive policies. Another unique support to Kyiv from its most critical ally, stating that they are taking action to increase Ukraine's military capability in cross-border operations. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin announced that Kiev has begun to invest in the production of long-range weapons. The $800 million defense industry fund for Ukraine has added another one to Russia's nightmares. The details that Defense Secretary Austin shared during the announcement have critically shortened Ukraine's path to independence victory. The Russia-Ukraine war, which has been ongoing since February 24, 2022, has taken a completely different turn as a result of the indirect interventions of Kiev's Western allies. As you may recall, Russian President Vladimir Putin guaranteed that this war would be won in just a few months when he announced the unjust invasion decision against the territory of Ukraine under the name of a special military operation. The Russian leader, who assured that the Russian armed forces which are far superior to Ukraine's military force in terms of quality and quantity, will achieve victory with minimal casualties, claimed that the impact of the war will not be felt in any way within the borders of the Russian Federation during this process. However, contrary to Putin's promises and the predictions of the vast majority of war analysts, the Ukrainian army, which has been effectively waging a self-defense struggle for more than 2 years, has launched a counter-revenge war in line with the new war strategy it has set by 2024. This shift in balance, which was significantly influenced by the appointment of Colonel General Alexander Syrsky as Commander-in-Chief, also clearly showed how much the cross-border operational capabilities of the Ukrainian army have improved over the months. The critical support that will ensure the continuity of the progress of the Ukrainian army, which has managed to deal heavy blows to the military infrastructures located on Russian territory hundreds of kilometers from its own borderline using domestically produced unmanned aerial vehicles, has come from Kiev's key ally, the United States. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, who brought up Ukraine's cross-border military capabilities during his visit to Rome, Italy, announced that as of now, the White House government has begun investing in Kiev for the production of long-range weapons. Austin, who caused a great echo on the agenda of the whole world, with this announcement made while answering the questions of the press members on Wednesday, October 23rd, emphasized that Ukraine's priorities are to be able to mass-produce unmanned aerial vehicles that are very effective on the battlefield, noting that the Ukrainian army has recently been able to easily hit strategic targets 400 kilometers beyond the border, and critical points that are deeper into Russia at some points. Austin also touched on the secrets of Ukraine's increasing pressure. Unlike Russia, the Ukrainian army, which uses unmanned aerial vehicles, not ballistic missiles, in cross-border airstrikes, according to Austin's interpretation, was able to demonstrate a more effective fight against Russia in the airspace, thanks to the fact that Ukrainian weapons manufacturers were able to mass-produce these UAVs at a much cheaper cost. Noting that the size of these UAV attacks can reach points farther than the 300-kilometer range of US-manufactured ATACMS missiles provided to Ukraine during the war, Austin said, "Therefore, it makes sense to invest in this capability, their ability to continue to scale up, and I think this meets and covers the needs that they will have, not only now, but also in the future." Austin, who said that the White House administration is preparing a large military support package to finance the production of unmanned aerial vehicles in Ukraine's defense industry, suggested that the projected support budget for this process will be $800 million in the first phase. However, Karman Corporation, a US-based aerospace company, will also start producing new parts for the US-manufactured Hawk anti-aircraft missile systems, included in the inventory of the Ukrainian Army's defense forces, and delivering these parts to Kiev as soon as possible. Responding to questions from members of the press about the possibility of lifting restrictions that prevent Ukraine from conducting cross-border attacks using Western weapons, US Secretary of Defense Austin said, "As we have told you many times, the range of an ATACMS is 300 kilometers. The Ukrainians are able to hit targets beyond 400 kilometers with precision. So, they're able to do it for a lot less of the cost. So this balances the balance sheet here. And you know that if Ukraine is going to continue its efforts, it will need to be able to afford it. That's why it makes sense for them to expand capacity. It makes sense for us to invest in what they are doing as well. It's working, effective, and precise." Austin's response indicates that restrictions on Ukraine's use of long-range weapons sent by Western Bloc countries within its territory for defensive purposes only will continue, at least for the time being. However, as the US administration has stated many times, Ukraine is completely free to use domestically produced weapon systems during long-range cross-border attacks, and for this reason, the countries of the Western Bloc, led by the United States, continue to indirectly support Ukraine by acting in accordance with the rules of the UN Security Council. In this way, both while preventing a possible global catastrophe such as a new world war that will bring the Western Eastern blocs against each other, and while Ukraine obtains a qualified defense industry that it can export after the war as well. However, despite the fact that the Western Bloc countries maintain their sensitivity to avoid increasing tensions, Russia is moving forward with insistent steps to turn this war into a global conflict. As it is known, one of the issues on the agenda at the moment is the allegations that North Korea has started providing military assistance to Russia. According to these claims, put forward by the South Korean government for the first time, the Pyongyang administration has begun sending its own army to Moscow in order to provide support to Russia during the unfair invasion attempt against Ukraine. As a result of the research, both NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte and US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin confirmed South Korea's alarming claims. Lloyd Austin, who stated that North Korean soldiers were deployed in Russia, said that research was continuing on what purpose these soldiers would be evaluated for. After this issue was brought up again during a press conference in the Italian capital of Rome, US Secretary of Defense Austin said, "Our analysts are continuing to investigate this. We are seeing evidence that there are North Korean troops on their way to Russia. Exactly what they do remains to be seen. These are the things we need to figure out. We will provide more detailed information about these later. But yes, as the investigations continue, we have obtained evidence that there are North Korean soldiers in Russia. Their priority right now is to find out why these North Korean soldiers are in Russia," Austin said, noting that if it turns out that these soldiers were deployed as joint fighters with the Russian army and supported the unjust invasion of Ukraine, there could be very serious problems. This situation will have serious implications, not only in Europe, but also in the Indo-Pacific, Austin said. There is a strengthened relationship between Russia and North Korea. You have all seen that North Korea is supplying weapons and ammunition to Russia, and this is the next step. Noting that Putin has faced a huge crisis created by manpower casualties over the past 2.5 years, the US minister said that this situation shows that Putin may be in much more problems than expected. Noting the recent visits of the Russian leader to buy more additional weapons and supplies from North Korea and then from Iran, Austin said, "Now it will turn out that Russia is trying to get more manpower if North Korean soldiers are deployed to be part of the struggle in Ukraine. But we'll see about that. These are questions that have not yet been answered." NATO, on the other hand, has offered to send a new delegation from South Korea to headquarters in Brussels to provide more data and evidence on this situation. It is expected that more information will be available after the visit of the delegation, and the Western Bloc led by the United States will determine the steps to be taken. NATO spokesman Farhak Daklala, who made a statement on the issue on Wednesday, October 23rd, said, "The Allies have confirmed evidence that North Korean troops have been deployed to Russia. The fact that a situation such as these troops are fighting in Ukraine will be another sign that North Korea's support for Russia's illegal war has significantly increased, and Russia has suffered significant losses on the front line. We are actively consulting within the alliance on this issue, and the North Atlantic Council will receive a briefing from South Korea, and soon we will be able to consider this issue in more detail."